Oh, Rebecca, love everybody's backgrounds. I know that's fun, isn't it?
Good morning, Rebecca. So, Kayleen, even though we've got stragglers coming in, to be respectful of everyone's time, because I think we've probably got some time constraints here just in terms of content. We may want to go ahead and get started and let folks join us as they join us.
Absolutely. I think that is a great idea.
Mhm.
So thank you everyone for joining us this morning for our discussion on strategic workforce planning. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. As you can all see, you're more than welcome to keep your cameras on or off, and we just like to ask that everyone stays muted while we're on the call until the very end. We will let you unmute and ask any questions you might have, but we will try to make this a little bit more interactive. So there will be a poll question throughout a couple of poll questions throughout the presentation, as well as some chat questions. And the speakers of our presentation will be staying on for the last 10 minutes of the presentation. If you have any specific questions, you're welcome to hang out then. Excuse me. So we are also recording the session and we will be sending this out afterward. We'll explain how all of that's going to work later, but if you can't stay through the whole thing, you will get a link to this recording. And I think those are all of my housekeeping notes. Is there anything that I might have missed, Phil or Raquel or Linda?
No, I think we're good.
All right, perfect.
Thank you.
So just to get started and kick things off, my name is Kayleen Babel. I am today's moderator. I work as Manager of Customer Communications and Marketing at Bullseye Engagement. So I spend most of my days researching and or writing about HR and human capital management and helping business leaders find software solutions that add value to their organizations. My role here is relatively minor compared to these folks that I'm about to introduce. So first we have Phil Walker, who is Managing Partner for Career Partners International Austin. And as managing partner, Phil leads a team of talent experts that enable their clients to drive sustainable business results by effectively aligning their people strategies to current and future needs. And over the past 30 years, he has worked with and consulted for a number of major corporations, including Xerox, Steelcase, Hayworth, and Right Management. So thank you, Phil, for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone. I certainly have to start off by saying, excuse me, Michael Francis, who is our practice leader for our human resource advisory services, unfortunately had an emergency and couldn't be with us this morning. So we certainly apologize for that. But Raquel and I have prepared what we think is a very robust schedule and agenda for you. We think the content is going to be great, and we look forward to today's presentation and session. So again, good morning.
Thank you for that. And we also have Raquel Furra, who is Chief Customer Success Officer at Bullseye Engagement. She has, prior to joining Bullseye, she spent over 20 years in HR leadership roles. So she's definitely going to bring some of her expertise and share some of her insights about how she herself has undergone the workforce planning process. And as Bullseye's Chief Customer Success Officer, her goal is to help leaders foster a positive employee experience that delivers business results. So thank you, Raquel, for joining us.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Kayleen, and thank you, Phil. It's definitely a pleasure to partner with Phil at CPI Austin, and definitely looking forward to sharing some good insight on workforce planning this morning.
Thank you. And now just to give you a quick overview of who we are, because obviously I've said a couple of times this has been put on by partnership between Bullseye Engagement and CPI Austin. So Bullseye Engagement provides talent development, employee engagement, succession planning, workforce planning, and leadership business intelligence dashboards in one simple, intuitive, integrated portal. And I'll talk a little bit about how Bullseye Solutions can help you with your workforce planning towards the end of this presentation. And I'll pass it over to you, Phil, to give us an introduction about CPI Austin.
Thanks again, Kayleen. As you mentioned earlier, CPI, Career Partners International Austin, is a leading human capital solutions firm. We're located here, obviously, in Austin, Texas. Our company really delivers solutions and services to clients through our 5 practice areas. And those are talent acquisition, talent and organizational development, human resource advisory, and career transition services. We are actually an equity partner and member of Career Partners International Global, which is a consortium of leading consultancies which provide our firm to a worldwide network of over 300 offices in about 45 countries. So as the owner and kind of managing partner for CPI Austin, as you mentioned, Kayleen, I lead a team of talent experts that really, to a large degree, empower organizations while delivering strategies and solutions and services across all aspects of the talent spectrum. Look, at the end of the day, at our core, CPI Austin helps organizations in 2 ways. We actually enable our clients to really acquire, develop, manage, and transition their workforce in order to achieve organizational and individual success. And then we also help to drive sustainable business results by effectively aligning their people strategies to their current and future needs. So our mission is really simple. We want to help organizations leverage the full potential of their people and navigate the ever-changing world of work.
All right, thank you for that introduction. So moving into the presentation, I'm going to set the stage and just give a brief overview of what strategic workforce planning is. So according to SHRM, workforce planning is the process an organization uses to analyze its workforce and determine the steps it must take to prepare for future staffing needs. Strategic workforce planning is workforce planning that's aligned to the organization's overall business objectives and the long-term vision. So moving into this next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about how to implement workforce planning and bring it all into your business strategy. So go right ahead, Phil.
Thanks, Kayleen. I think we all recognize that this past year has been challenging on a lot of different fronts, especially in the world of work. And over the past 12 months, we've witnessed numerous organizations pivot in terms of their business strategy due to various crises, whether that's the impact of COVID-19 or social and racial unrest, or even an economic recession. So what has become abundantly clear through this time, this last 12 months, especially in today's talent-based economy, is that the workforce itself is arguably the most tangible and important asset of an organization. And despite its importance, this asset is often overlooked. It's not carefully planned, it's not measured, and certainly not optimized. And so this means that many organizations are not sufficiently aware of the current or future workforce gaps that will limit execution of business strategy. And yet at the same time, you know what we hear? We hear board of directors, we hear CEOs, and sometimes we hear CHROs that will frequently declare that workforce planning and data-driven decision-making is a top priority for their organization. And so it's difficult to understand sometimes, you know, what's that gap? What's that gap between intent and execution? And the most obvious reason and cause for that gap is a lack of consistent objectives regarding the outputs of workforce planning and a lack of a consistent process by which organizations conduct workforce planning and predictive modeling. So what are the basic steps of a strategic workforce planning process? Well, As Kayleen mentioned a little earlier, strategic workforce planning is pretty simple. It's really about making sure that you've got the right number of people with the right skills, at the right place, at the right time, so that they can deliver on the organization's business goals. And the first step, as we see in this slide, is that we need to understand, we being HR and those responsible for workforce planning within the organization, really need to understand the organization. What does that mean? Business goals and strategies, where the company is headed, how they will measure success, and what are the critical factors that will impact that success. So it's also very important to understand that there is no one size fits all when it comes to workforce planning. So a workforce planning strategy is developed, as I mentioned earlier, in line with business needs and future requirements. And these strategies are typically unique to each organization. So understanding what the organization needs are and how the business defines success is a key prerequisite for really creating an effective strategy. So this step really links the workforce planning process with the organization's strategic plan and also the business plan, as well as any other workforce activities required to carry out the goals and objectives of those strategic plans, both short-term and long-term. Second step, you have to identify the critical competencies that are required. In essence, think about this. Identifying the competencies the organization will need to achieve its strategic goals is paramount. The organization can identify its competencies by studying top performers, those that have been successful in their current jobs, and how those top performers succeed, because competencies focus on the attributes that separate those high performers from the rest of the workforce. And there are really two key elements in identifying these competencies. The first is workforce skills analysis, which really describes the skills required to carry out a function, right? So conducting what I'll call workforce skills analysis requires that the company leaders anticipate how the nature of the organization's work will change, and then identify future HR requirements. The second most important piece is job analysis, which really focuses in on tasks and responsibilities and knowledge and skill requirements, as well as other factors that contribute to successful job performance. Job analysis collects information on successful job performance. Let me say that again. Job analysis collects critical information on successful job performance. And this information the organization obtains during this job analysis becomes the basis for identifying competencies. Next, we need to conduct a current workforce analysis. Well, what does that do? Well, analysis of the existing workforce and of the existing ways that we work tells an organization where it is now, and also creates a starting point for getting to where the organization really needs to be. And let me be real clear. Conducting a current state assessment, organizational workforce assessment, is beyond just headcount planning. It involves thinking about the skills that people have, how they're going to grow over time, what intentions they have. In other words, do they actually even want to move up and be promoted? Do they want to change jobs over a certain period of time? And if so, should that information, those decisions and data, should that inform how we facilitate movement within the organization? So we have to understand who we have in place right now, where they're going, and how they're developing. By doing that, we'll be able to plan more accurately, for sure, downstream. So again, we really need to get clear on defining the workforce that we currently have. Then we have to predict future needs, right? So now we've got a clear understanding of who we have in the workforce currently, who's in our organization, what their skill sets are in terms of numbers and skills and intentions and other dimensions that an organization or HR department might deem appropriate. We can now do a really effective and valuable future state visioning exercise. In other words, what is the workforce of the future going to look like? What is the business environment that they're going to be in going to look like? What skills are we going to need? And then how are we going to acquire those skills? So now that we understand who we have in the business, we must go back and kind of project our internal, what I'll call talent demand. We need to determine what will we need to get the job done, given our business strategy. And let's, for argument's sake, let's assume for right now, we're in a growth business, right? And we're going to see that we need to acquire people with certain skills. We have to determine whether those skills required are inside the organization or outside the organization. And again, we're going to need to assess the internal supply of talent as well as the external supply of talent. And it's important to understand what makes more sense to the organization, whether to develop or move people internally, or maybe talent externally and acquiring that talent externally. And the reason that's important is because we have to be attentive to where the talent is. The talent might not be in our market. It might be elsewhere. So again, it's about understanding the talent demand that matches our business strategy, and then auditing our internal supply and forecasting and assessing the external supply of talent. Now, here's the fun part. We need to identify where the talent gaps are. So organizations may have the, what I'll call, may have the workforce that they need to continue operating using their existing processes. But when developing a workforce planning strategy, it's essential to consider where those skill gaps may appear as the business changes. So it's really about understanding what the business has and what it's likely to need to meet predicted requirements. So now that we have a good understanding of who is in our workforce, the talent demand given the work that needs to be done, and we've audited the internal and external sides of talent, we can now do a gap analysis and scenario planning. And so there are typically really four main areas that you need to explore during that gap analysis. What's the internal development and mobility strategy? As I mentioned earlier, do we have the people that have the ability to be developed and trained to move into some of these new positions? Do they have the mobility from a geographical perspective to be able to move into new positions? What's our external recruiting strategy? How are we going to work with external partners? And how are we going to design the organization differently? Once these questions are addressed and answered, now we're ready to generate and execute a workforce strategy. So we've determined business needs. We've conducted an analysis of the existing workforce. We've predicted future workforce needs, and we've identified potential skills gaps. This next step really involves the identification of strategies to close gaps, right? Plans to implement the strategies and measures for assessing strategic progress. So these strategies could include such things as defining critical roles, recruiting, training and retraining, restructuring organizations, contracting out, succession planning, and even technological enhancements as well. The strategy should really draw upon real data and data analysis to assign and really redeploy and utilize workers that optimizes employee performance, as well as help HR teams to really recruit strategically. And then finally, developing a good workforce planning strategy doesn't end with implementation of the plan, as I mentioned earlier. It's important to review the strategy in action to ensure that it's having the desired effect. Businesses also should be very, very clear on what key performance indicators they will use to measure the success of the strategy. Many of you may know, we were talking about this right before we came on. Many of you on the call may know that Tesla just moved its corporate headquarters here to the Austin area. They're building a $1.1 billion manufacturing facility to produce electric cars and full-scale batteries. And last year I was on a call and I was listening to Rohan Patel, who is Tesla's Senior Director of Policy and Business Development. And he was talking about their extensive strategic workforce planning process and model. And he went on to state that once the business strategy was developed, meaning once they decided that they wanted to open up a facility somewhere in the country to produce and manufacture and develop electric cars and batteries, one of the key steps was to select a location. And once Tesla determined the critical competencies and skill sets that were required for this new facility, and then assessed their workforce, their current workforce, because they were based in California, in terms of where they were and where they wanted to be, and then the talent gaps that existed, it became abundantly clear, based on what Rohan said, that Austin was the right choice based on our immense tech talent pool that we have here in our local area. And the company also plans, as you take a look at their workforce model, the company also plans to forge some pretty interesting partnerships with area high schools and colleges and workforce training agencies, along with other trade groups, as it builds out its employee bench here in the region. Let's talk a little bit about some of the key benefits in the business case, if you will, for a strategic workforce planning process. There are certainly several key benefits. I'm just going to talk about three right now that we think are really important and paramount to the process. The first is one that I just talked about and mentioned, aligning strategic planning with headcount and talent planning. Analyzing the skills of your current employees can provide insights into the skill or resource gaps that you currently have within your business. So through this evaluation, you'll be able to identify the gaps between your current workers' competencies and then what you'll need in the future to reach your goals. Using that information, you can ensure that you acquire top talent with the skills required for your company's success. The second benefit is really that by shifting workforce planning from a traditional top-down sort of traditional exercise, strategic exercise, that in many instances really only provokes, provokes some interesting conversation and thought about the future, right? Transitioning that to more of an operational exercise that we just went through with our workforce model, that's designed to manage talent. Workforce planning becomes really more of a concrete activity with specific financial implications. And then by providing metrics to quantify the risk, it provides something even more concrete for leaders to manage. And finally, one of the primary benefits is it helps to control unplanned talent costs. So when we really fully understand through a well thought out workforce planning process and strategy, the relationship between talent demand, who, what, and where, and talent supply, internal, external, upskilling, etc., and then utilize the data to support our actions, we're in an advanced position to make better decisions that can help minimize risk and then control costs.
All right, so with all that said, we'd like to take a brief pause here and go ahead and do a couple of poll questions just to see where all of your organizations are in terms of workforce planning. So the questions will appear through Zoom on your screen, but I'll also have them up here on the PowerPoint slide. So if you can take a second, I'm going to launch the poll. So first question, is your organization currently engaged in strategic workforce planning? So it should be an easy yes or no. And then our second question is, if it'll let me switch, there we go. Which of the three areas we just discussed is the biggest priority for your organization right now? Looks like I've got about 40% of our votes in. Give you guys a couple more minutes. Okay, we've got 65% now.
Everybody still needs that second cup of coffee, Kayleen.
I know, time to wake up. If you're on the West Coast, I really applaud you for joining us this morning. It's pretty early for you, I know. We've got 23 out of our 32, which a couple of us are presenters, so I don't think we'll be answering this question. Okay, why don't we're at 70%. You think I'm good to go ahead and check on the results?
Yes, go ahead and show the results, Kayleen.
Okay, are you guys able to see the results?
Yeah.
That's about 65% of you said your organization is currently engaged in workforce planning. And then of the three areas we discussed, it looks like the most common answers were aligning strategic planning with headcount and talent planning, as well as moving from reactive to proactive talent
Yeah.
management.
Yeah. It's not unusual in terms of that first question, that about almost a little bit over a third of these organizations are not currently engaged in a strategic workforce planning process. That's not unusual. That's excuse me, very consistent with some of the national data that we're seeing.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing the results, and from here, why don't we go ahead and move forward into some more of the details of workforce planning. So I'm going to go ahead and draw upon a little bit of Raquel's expertise here. So can you shed a little bit of light on how you can actually configure your talent pipeline so that your production and services don't miss a beat due to things like sudden turnover, growth, and vacancies?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm not surprised by the results that were displayed. Workforce planning, it can be quite daunting to figure out how do you start it, how do you implement it, and then also how do you get the buy-in from your leadership team. It can also be fun. And so typically, HR, we have so much on our plate and we have so many different competing priorities. And so, when someone has this magical idea within the organization to do workforce planning, it's like, in theory, it sounds great, but how do we actually execute it? And so just a couple things that I just want to share from, my previous experience in HR prior to joining Bullseye. And one, I would start with the big picture and, develop a comprehensive plan on where the gaps are between the current competencies that you have and the workforce that currently possesses the existing competencies and the future competencies. By making a strategic workforce plan, it allows you and your leaders to make decisions on how to best structure your organization and also deploy the your workplace. And so right now, we're in a real neat position in respect to some companies are returning back to work. Some companies are going to continue to stay remote. Some are kind of doing a hybrid approach. And so how you look at your workforce, it's going to be different depending on what your scenario is, and then what competencies that you're looking for, especially if you used to work in the office and now you're looking to be remote. Those competencies are going to be a bit different on what the DNA of that person is going to look like for that position. And so what I would honestly recommend doing is start with the most critical need that you have, right? If you're new to workforce planning and you're looking to get this bought off on by your leadership team, what's the most critical thing that you have? So just for a few examples, Fortune 500 company that I worked for in past life, we had a heavy amount of folks that were in that retirement age space, right? So they were within, now to 3 or 4 years from retirement. And the company really struggled with, first of all, who is in that space, who's about to retire, what are their skills and competencies that they need to backfill that position. And then how are we going to backfill the position? So, of course, y'all all have heard the build, borrow, and buy, but it really does help, especially whenever you're looking at, someone who has been with the organization, for their entire career. They've got so much tribal knowledge that how do we share that? How do you share that and implement that with either someone that's outside the company that you're going to have to hire and there will be a transition period, or are we going to grow someone internally, right, to be part of that position and have that knowledge transfer? And so that would really be, the key areas of how I would tackle that. Another thing, again, is just, identifying, overcoming the internal and external barriers, right, to accomplish these strategies. And so, for example, sometimes it's about socializing these plans with your internal leadership, right? So you may have the C-level that's on board with workforce planning, but then when you're conducting, these gaps with your business leaders for a particular division or unit or group, it's really getting them to think about, okay, retirement, that could be a little easy to, figure out, right? Because it could be based on someone's age or based on the tenure with the company. But whenever you get to growth, like we're building a new plant or we're going to have this new location and we're projecting, 10%, 20%, whatever growth that looks like, what type of skills, competencies, positions are you really going to be looking for? And it's getting those leaders to look at it from that lens. Of course, you've got tools, I'm sure, with your HRS system that can give you turnover, right? So you can kind of see what that turnover looks like and plan according to that. But, those are just some of the areas that, I would share with this group just from my past life.
Good.
Thank you, Raquel. So I know you touched on this a little bit, but with different business cycles, how can we prepare customized approaches in terms of workforce planning, no matter what the economic climate? And I think I'll pass this question to Phil this time.
Sure. Thanks, Kaylee. HR professionals are constantly concerned about this painful, what I call boom or bust cycle of budget cuts, rapid growth, more budget cuts. And really what I think HR professionals want more than anything is stability, right? Everyone knows that business cycles have ups and downs, right? There are periods of growth and periods of recession. Each seems to kind of happen every few years. And so the surprising thing is that, unfortunately, and I know this doesn't refer to anybody on this call, but the surprising thing is that some HR departments, rather than prepare sort of customized approaches for the different phases of the business cycle, tend to do things the same way, no matter what the economic climate. So they fall into the trap of operating independent of the business cycle. And the main reason that any HR department suffers through these, what we're calling phases, is that there's no strategy to plan to participate in the company's business cycle, right? So as strategic partners, HR leaders should make sure that they're adopting really what I'll call a long-term, big picture sort of approach and view of HR and the business. And there's really two distinct reasons for planning ahead, right? So the first reason is to lessen the impact, as I mentioned earlier, of the boom and bust cycle and the management, the operation of the HR department itself, and blah, blah, blah. But the second, and perhaps the most important reason for planning ahead in HR is because HR manages usually the talent pipeline for the organization. And so it's crucial to maintain both the pipeline and the talent inventory at the right levels. So traditionally, we've seen organizations that kind of, overhire and then not have the capacity to reduce the workforce to necessary levels without inflicting some major damage on employee morale. Because what happens is when you have to hire and ramp up very suddenly, and all of a sudden the business goes away, what does that mean? It means reduction in force. And that's a tremendous impact on employee morale. In contrast, if you think about, during the boom phases, right? Those were the bust phases. During the boom phases, HR processes, which are typically designed for the average load, right? Average workload on a daily basis. They can't handle the overload requirements of high volume hiring, and there's retention issues. So fortunately, there's a common answer to kind of both of these challenges, right? Boom or bust, right? It's strategic workforce planning, right? A good workforce planning process and model has tremendous impact on the business. Probably some of the most significant include it eliminates surprises, right? So we all know that HR should limit the stressful trauma related to being surprised. They should have the time, which a lot of times they don't, to prepare processes and answers. They should also have the ability to kind of rapidly figure out positions that are vacant due to sudden turnover, after that production of services really don't miss a beat. The second key benefit is really around what I call smoothing out the business cycle, right? So you can smooth out business cycles by developing processes that ramp up and down your talent inventory and effectively during both good times and lean times. And really that ensures that the company meets production goals by employing the right number of people. You can increase production, what I call product development or production development speed, because the company has the brightest people and with the right skills to take products through to their launch and to do that on time. The third, probably biggest benefit is it identifies problems early. And the analogy I like to use is it really acts as a smoke detector to some degree and system that can be in place to notify managers before a talent fire gets out of hand. So it would be much easier to manage the potential damage. So having to fix problems we all know is expensive and it's painful. A better approach through a smoke detector system is to make sure that we prevent problems from ever occurring, or we minimize the potential of those problems ever occurring. So when you have an effective workforce planning process, you can lower turnover rate, certainly because employees are continually groomed for new opportunities that fit their interests and their capabilities. You can also, as I just mentioned, you can also minimize layoffs by making sure that you're managing headcount. And that ensures that the company won't have a quote unquote surplus of talent. And then finally, and this is important, I think, and I hear this consistently a lot from HR leaders, who are strategic business partners and want to be at the quote unquote big table. One of the key benefits here is it helps improve HR's image, right? So looking like you're constantly in a frantic state doesn't really inspire confidence or improve your department's image. But by being well prepared, for any eventuality. You build your image, your brand, your credibility. So C-suite will be more likely to really invest in you.
Thank you for sharing that, Phil. Did you have anything you wanted to add here, Raquel?
No, thanks. Phil did great job of giving an outline on this.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and pass this question to you, Raquel. What are some strategies to manage through uncertainty and prevent some of this expensive, painful damage from talent shortages or resource reduction, kind of like what Phil just talked about?
Sure, exactly. So first of all, I mean, it's estimated that businesses who deploy workforce planning strategies are more likely, or 66% more likely than their counterparts or competitors, right, to successfully boost their performance of their human resources without increasing existing headcount. And that can be huge for organizations. It will also, it offers greater productivity without the cost. And so really kind of knowing what your workforce looks like, kind of, I call it the DNA, right? So what is the DNA of your workforce, and knowing, who we can develop, who we can grow, or who we can put in the stretch, I call it stretch goals or stretch positions, right? To kind of get that person who you see is that new up and comer that could fill in another space within your workforce. It's also estimated. Now, I found this a little fascinating because it says the average time to fill an open position is 42 days. And so I started my career actually in recruitment, and, then it went into other roles within human resources. I have to tell you, if we filled a technical critical position in 42 days, we were all quite happy. Most of the time it's a lot longer, just depending on the position, right? Or it could be shorter depending on the position and how easy that it is. But regardless of the time to fill, you've got your leadership team that has these open positions, and you're in HR, whether you're in the recruitment space or in an HR leadership role, you're still being held accountable for how long it takes to fill, your key critical positions. So why not look at your existing workforce on who you can grow and build to backfill these key and critical positions? Not every position, but especially for the key and critical positions. One, this will help the organization with that, understand the organization and not having such a high upturn with, learning the company, but also you're going to have an employee who you'll be able to retain and continue to grow long term. And I know you're all seasoned HR professionals, so that's something that you already know, but it's just really putting it into practice, right? Another thing would be, a lot of times our hiring managers are focused more on getting more out of the existing employees, right? And so this is good and this is bad. And sometimes that can have a negative impact with your existing workforce because you're stretching them so thin that they become overwhelmed with the jobs at hand while you're looking to backfill those positions. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind and, have conversations with your hiring leaders, right? And sometimes this happened to me many times in my past life. Maybe it never happened to anybody else, or maybe it has, but a lot of times our managers hold out for the best candidate, and so you have your job description and your manager wants 100% of 100% from a candidate, right? Which we all know that that's not realistic. And so sometimes having those conversations with those managers on, what I call the 80-20 rule, right? You're probably going to find someone with 80% of that experience, and then the other 20% we'll train them, or that's something that we can overcome as an objective. So really looking at, your overall workforce plan, attacking it from, what your current resources are and how you can continue to build and grow that internally. That's honestly the best recommendation that, that I can give. And again, there will be circumstances where you do have to hire externally, but the more you can grow and build that talent internally, the better. for the organization and for the employee, but it all starts with having that game plan, and the game plan starts with workforce planning. And I will leave it at that.
Okay, yeah, awesome. Good insights there. And now we're going to take another brief pause and get some audience participation. So if you can click on the chat button at the bottom of your screen, unless your chat might already be open over in the panel on the side. And we have a question for you related to what we just discussed. So if you could answer, which area of workforce planning is your organization struggling to implement? So just as a refresher, the 3 areas that we discussed are up here on the screen. It might be assessing your talent pipeline and talent needs, could be determining your talent strategy, or the financial planning and budgeting aspect of workforce planning. Or if none of these answers apply to you and there's something completely different that your organization might be struggling to implement, feel free to add that in the chat in your own words.
Kayleen, can they just put the number of the answer in the chat?
Sure. That is also an option. Yes, go right ahead and put the number. We've got determining talent strategy. Joyce said assessing talent pipeline and talent needs. Got number 2 a couple of times. So determining your talent strategy. It's like a common one. We struggle with moving fast enough. We only have 1 strategic workforce planner developer. Yeah, and I guess it could be multiple, like Adam answered 1 and 2 to a degree.
Talent strategy seems to be pretty prevalent here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Getting candidates.
Good feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really good feedback. Kayleen, Phil, if I can chime in just to provide a little, maybe some other insights with how folks are answering these questions. And quite honestly, where you're at in any cycle, 1, 2, or 3 it's not uncommon, right? We all have to start somewhere. Assessing your current time, I'm going to start with 1, and then Phil, please feel free and chime in, but assessing your talent pipeline and needs, that can again be quite daunting and quite challenging. And so, not knowing enough about your current situation, just some feedback of how I approach this at, a couple of organizations that I worked for in past life. And one, depending on your company, start with, cross-functional teams. So start with your engineering group. If that's where you see you have the most challenge, or start with your F&A group, or start with your supply chain group. Again, just depending on, the makeup of your organization, that's kind of where I would start. Then when you get to determining the talent strategy, you're going to have a mix of that build, borrow, and buy. But what I found really useful is when you're assessing that talent pipeline and need. So that's step 1, and that's kind of like your framework, right? Partner, I found it very beneficial to partner up with the HR consultants or business partners in the different verticals that they were responsible for, and different key leaders, as we were the key high level leaders, to really find out if there was anyone internal where you could build, right? And if there's not an internal candidate, the employee that you could build that talent, then you're going to know, okay, are we going to borrow? And borrow means you're going to either hire someone as a consultant, or they're going to be a temp or attempt to hire. And buy means, recruiting externally, because you don't have anyone in-house that you can build and grow into that particular positions. And then once you have all of that, then you can kind of estimate some of the financial. And then, I know when Kayleen gets into showing a little bit of the technology aspect, that will really put it in a different perspective on the financial aspect, because knowing what the financial need is whenever you're creating these strategies can be absolutely paramount when you're talking with your business leaders. And you know, in HR, having good data and good valid data is just paramount, and will actually be able to give you, you know, a high level of credibility whenever you're talking to these leaders. So hopefully that sheds a little more insight of the different steps and phases on, you know, possibly how to execute that from a higher level. And Phil, I'll turn it to you for any follow-up comments.
Yeah, I think the one thing I'd like to add, even outside of these three key questions and three key areas, is when we're thinking about developing an effective and beneficial strategic workforce planning process, the skills you need to achieve your organization's goal may change. And yes, the technology, as we all know, is going to play a key role in future skills that you're going to be hiring for. But let's not forget about your company culture in the strategic workforce planning process. So just like the people and the skills you need, your organizational culture is also constantly evolving. So when you're planning for the workforce, taking a look at the current workforce, what's our future workforce going to look like, what are those critical competencies, skill sets that are going to be needed, make sure that you're thinking about how you want to steer the cultural development that takes place within any organization, and what core values that you want to make sure that you're preserving over time.
Good insights from the both of you. Thank you so much. And now moving forward to talk a little bit about how technology can help streamline this entire process. So I don't know, first maybe we can start out by, if Raquel, you could give us a little bit of insight as to how strategic workforce planning can be difficult when you don't have the data or the technology to pull all this into place.
Sure. Thanks, Kayleen. And yeah, so before Kayleen gets into just kind of giving you an overview of some of the technology aspects, I don't know about, you know, the audience here, but whenever I was doing workforce planning, it was on Excel. It was on Excel. It was on a whiteboard, a notepad, maybe Visio if I was lucky, or PowerPoint. And so it was a bit painful to, one, have real-time data, and to also be able to, you know, do the what if scenarios and kind of shift things around in a you know, in a pinch, you know, whenever you've got your leadership team asking you what workforce planning is for this particular group and what the financials are associated with it, et cetera. It was really challenging to be able to turn that around quickly, because again, when you're in HR, you're not just working on workforce planning. You have so many other competing priorities. You're juggling many hats. You're working in all types of different systems. And so to have to do this on Excel or Visio and make quick changes for a meeting that's, you know, what, in an hour or 20 minutes, it can be quite daunting and quite challenging. And so there is nothing better than HR being empowered and having real-time data at your fingertips to be able to be that strategic partner with your leader. And again, that will just add more credibility, and HR will have a seat at the table, right? And so you're going to be having a seat at the table with your leadership and having real solid information that you'll be able to share with them. And so with that, Kayleen, I'll turn it back to you to show some examples of how that can actually help get you out of this whole Excel world and not having real data, real-time data, you know, at your fingertips.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think before I jump into the next few slides, it's helpful for me to just explain the screenshots that you will be seeing. They come from Bullseye's platform. So we have recently launched a workforce planning module. So everything that you see is fully the functionality that you would be able to use with Bullseye's system. And what it'll do is it will sync up with your HRIS, your payroll system, whatever ERP, and it's going to pull all of that data so you have it real time, just like Raquel has mentioned. And that's going to allow you to pull so many insights and share that data with your leaders. So one of the main things you can do is quickly identify where your skill gaps or retirement risk lies. So you'll get lots of nice charts and reports and graphs And this will help you move from being reactive to proactive with your talent management, like we talked about earlier. So you'll be able to see where these skill gaps lie. The system will kind of flag where you might have skill gaps, vacancies, retirement risks, and the data basically, this data sync between your HRIS and the system will do more of the heavy lifting. So you don't have to spend all of your time creating these charts and graphs in Excel or in Visio and PowerPoint. It'll pull these automatically for you, and you can create really powerful presentations with data that's always up to date. So this is just a bigger view of those reports. And I found this statistic that said that 46% of HR leaders said they're frequently asked to report on people data, but 68% of them struggle to actually share this analysis across the organization. So having all of this at your fingertips, you can export these charts. You could also give access to the system to some of your senior leadership so they can go in and see these reports themselves. It really helps be able to share this data across your organization. So you can see here, a couple of the reports you can pull would be things like your expected loss due to retirement by year. You can see the age range distribution of certain groups of employees. You'd also be able to see the retirement eligibility. And this is all fully customizable. So if you have a different criteria for retirement eligibility, you could do that. It doesn't have to be ages 60 plus, or it could be whatever your organization uses. And then it also enables you to really easily create organization charts. So like Raquel said earlier, you're not going to be digging through multiple databases and spreadsheets and possibly risking using data that's not up to date. It'll all be automatically pulled, and can't really glean this from my screenshot here, but the system is all drag and drop interface. So it's super simple. You don't have to be a data scientist to be able to use it. You just drag and drop to make your different workforce plans. And the great thing is you can create as many what if scenarios as you need without accidentally affecting actual data. And you can create different what if scenarios for different quarters, for different business cycles, like we mentioned earlier, or planning for expansion. Anything that you could possibly need to create, you can do so here. And with Bullseye system, at least, you're not going to be charged additional fees for any additional plans you create. It's unlimited access. So aside from that, you can also view the entire company with these org charts. You can see anyone from any department, division, location. It won't just be limited to your senior leadership. So it kind of goes beyond just that succession planning that you might be doing. You'll be able to see everyone, including vacant positions, and you could also customize between having full-time positions and contractors. There's really a wide range of functionalities that you can do here. And this is just a little bit of a zoomed in view. And I think I'll pause for a second and see, Raquel, if you have anything to add based on what I've mentioned in terms of how this type of functionality might be useful.
No additional, comments on it other than it definitely would have made my life a lot easier whenever I was conducting workforce planning for most recently a global Fortune 500 company. And, again, this was, several years back. So there wasn't any technology that was created out there. Again, it was just Excel, whiteboard, and Visio. So this would have made it so much easier to show this to the leaders, and of course then work with the finance team to make sure they knew what was going to be, how to plan, from a budgetary standpoint.
So
Thank you.
Kathleen, I have a question. This is Linda Farley. I'm wondering the number on the like for David Gill, the 203,000, is that a total of the salaries that report to him?
That's absolutely correct. It's cut off here because of the screenshot size, but essentially on the top of each person's box, you'll see the total of their salary plus all of their direct reports. So that's correct. His, I guess, are just branches over here that you can't see on the left side of the screen. Okay. So that kind of brings me in nicely to how the system will also allow you to plan for salary and budget adjustments. So you can have these salaries turned on or turned off if that's not something that you need to use, but this really helps to keep finance and HR aligned because you'll be able to see where these costs are coming from. And I know for a lot of HR leaders, this may be the scariest part of doing all this workforce planning is doing all the work and then taking your proposed plans to leadership and showing them the cost. So with a system like this, it's going to pull in all of your talent data and you can get a really detailed view of the costs of your proposed plans and give finance leaders access to this platform so they can understand what the budget implications are of your different scenarios. And so if it also allows a capability where I can see everyone's current salaries, and if I want to plan maybe a 5% increase to everyone's salary, I can plug that in and see how that would affect the total budget. And let me see, it doesn't show here, but you'd also be able to see what the salaries are for those vacant positions you might have. So if you are in need of talent, you can kind of plan ahead of time what the salaries for those members might be. So this all happens with just a few clicks. It's also really easy to undo anything you might have done. And so it doesn't ever affect any of your actual data, but it lets you create all of these powerful models and graphs and charts to bring to your leadership and always have that up-to-date data. So to sort of recap here, why you might use strategic workforce planning technology. Well, of course, it's going to increase your efficiency. As we've mentioned many times, you'll reduce the time you've spent gathering all of the data for your workforce plans. And that means that you can actually focus on analyzing the business impact of your talent decisions. I remember being on a call very recently where we were showing some of our capabilities to a customer, and he told me that 70% of his job right now is simply gathering the data and then putting it into Excel and finding it. And he was like overwhelmed when he saw that we could just take all of that data right away. And then now he can, instead of spending 70% of time creating these charts and graphs, he can take that time and actually be strategic with the data. It'll also quickly highlight turnover and retirement risk, so you can prevent any costly damage from talent shortages down the line. And it allows you to easily share the data between not only your human capital, but also finance leaders and business leaders. So that way everyone can see easily the impact that your talent decisions are making, and you'll be able to see these measurable and meaningful outcomes. So that is my little spiel on technology. And if anyone has anything else to add, I don't know if Raquel or Phil do, I think this kind of wraps up our presentation today.
Raquel, this is Rupali Ray, and I had a question. One of the issues that I have faced in my organizations, in Raquel's words, in my past life, is managers sometimes get the assessment of talent incorrect. I have seen individual being let go who shouldn't have, So we put a lot of faith in managers assessing talent in terms of, whether they are somebody who can grow in role or a potential or high potential. They have overestimated and underestimated. And because we are in HR, we don't always know, the talent value on the job. So we do have to trust the managers. How can you get that aspect right? What can HR do to make sure, it's people's careers, and it has always bothered me, when I see the assessment has not been quite up to the mark.
Yeah, so this is Raquel. I'll go ahead and take that question because I completely understand exactly what you're talking about, right? And again, as HR, we only know so many of the employees, right? We can't know every single employee in the entire organization and their skills capabilities, right? So one thing I would just share with you is, it gets into a different section, and it's kind of workforce planning, but it's really around succession planning. And so something that, that I found really valuable and insightful is, again, I'm talking about a little different topic than workforce planning, but it ties to it. And when you're doing succession planning, so you don't get into a situation where you've got a leader that is letting someone go, because maybe there's a personality conflict between the manager and employee, and that can most certainly happen. So what I did in, again, past life is, did succession planning and did what we call a 9-box. We mapped out a 9-box. And so once we got to a point where the HR business partner, myself, and that leader looked at their entire organization. So maybe it was an operations group, an engineering group, a finance group, whatever that, or technology group. So whatever group that was, once we had our initial 9-box mapped out and had what I call the impressions, right? Or the manager, the leader had to justify why they would put Raquel in, the particular 9-box, or why they would put Kayleen in a particular 9-box. And then what we did is we created these cross-functional leadership 9-box discussions, to where senior leaders would come to these meetings and we would look at each group's 9-box and really make an assessment to figure out, yes, Kayleen really supposed to be in this particular 9-box and why. And it was interesting because other leaders, again, we created a safe place for these leaders to come and have conversations because it's such sensitive information. But, they were able to share, Kayleen may report directly to this particular manager or leader. And again, maybe there's a personality conflict, but she also did a lot of work in a different group and they had a completely different impression and just absolutely raved and loved what she did. So I honestly would start with 9-box succession planning and then go into building workforce planning, because that will give you as HR that opportunity to hear from other leaders that maybe that employee had interaction with, and that other leader may not know about, because again, there's just personality conflicts that could result in someone ended up leaving the organization. So does that help at all? Share some light?
Sure, absolutely. And we have been using the 9-box matrix, checking on performance and potential, but I think it's always a good idea to get a second dimension, as in, ask somebody in the cross-function group other than just the direct manager, to avoid that any kind of bias or personality conflict, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, I saw that added just tremendous value, but it's creating that space. And of course, sometimes HR has to be that moderator, right? Because again, you're all internal people, right? And so people are going to have opinions, you want them to, but sometimes managers and leaders aren't going to agree. So it's really creating that safe space to have that authentic and raw collaboration and communication about these employees.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. So I think to close things out, Phil, you have a few words for us.
Boy, this has been fun and went way too fast. I just want to take a second and thank everyone for your attendance today. I think, and I hope what we've learned this morning is that by implementing a workforce planning process, and that number one, implementing a workforce planning process can be pretty challenging, number one. But by implementing one, and certainly it's any sort of strategic workforce planning model and process is a very systematic, kind of fully integrated sort of organizational process that involves, as we've talked about, proactively planning ahead to avoid talent surpluses and shortages. But when the workforce planning process is supported by, as Kayleen has talked about, is supported by the technology that can help streamline talent management processes and provides not only what I'll call a real world snapshot of your existing workforce, but also a really good way of planning wherever you're headed in the future, And you've then, I think at that point, you've really laid a solid foundation to help your company adapt to whatever the workforce challenges that are going to come your way. So thank you so much to Bullseye for partnering with CPI Austin on this. I thought it was extremely informative. Hopefully our audience thought the same way. Just a very quick reminder that all of our attendees will receive an email from CPI Austin with a certificate of attendance so that you can receive SHRM professional development credit. And we'll get that out to you as quickly as possible. In that same email, we're going to invite those that are in attendance today to take advantage of what I'll call a complimentary offer. And so we're going to ask that if you're interested, CPI Austin will provide your organization, as long as you have one of your leaders, HR leaders at the table, take advantage of a complimentary workforce assessment and that we will conduct. And we'll do that on the, as I said, on a complimentary basis. And then we'll follow that up with a customized Bullseye demo based on the results of that assessment. So really key sort of information I think you can glean about your organization, especially based on some of the poll results that we saw earlier. So we want to make that offer to you. There'll be more information in the email that we send out about that that you'll get later on this week. So again, thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules. We know you could have been anywhere this morning, but thank you for hanging with us. Hopefully you learned something about strategic workforce planning and the technology that supports that. If you'd like to hang around for additional questions, conversation, feel free to do that. We know that some of you have to jump off and head on to the next best thing, but feel free to hang with us and have some conversation and ask some additional questions. So again, thank you so much for your time this morning. So are there any questions that maybe have popped up, Kayleen, out of the chat box?
I don't believe so. Just had the last piece was our answers to the chat question.
If anyone wants to ask a question, they can unmute your mic and go ahead and ask.
Ask a question or make comments.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about what's going on in your organization.
Phil, we're getting a lot of thank yous for this. It was a great session. So
yeah, it looks like everybody's using the chat room.
all right.
Well, good. Well, since no one has stepped up, thanks, Kayleen, Raquel, thank you so very much. Before we jump off, I just need to say thank you so much to Linda Farley and to Karen Gomez for being the, as you say, the wind beneath our wings in terms of helping us to facilitate this morning. Thank you so very much for helping logistically and all the other great things that you guys do. So I really appreciate it. It's a great team effort. And as I said, we will get that information out to all of the attendees post haste, and you'll have it within the next couple of days. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Phil. Great
Thank
partnering with
you.
you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.